20th century was a time filled with conflict, advancements, and change. Post-World War II, countries across Western Europe, including Britain, France, and Italy, faced communist influences that eventually led to radical changes and difficulties towards the end of the Cold War in the decade of the 1990s to the 2000s.
Once a major superpower, failed to retain its status in the 1970s under Margaret Thatcher, whose attempt to replace property taxes with a flat rate brought about her resignation. After a term, Britain faced frequent changes in leadership under John Major, Tony Blair, and David Cameron.
Economically, Britain tried to deal with the inflation crisis with the exchange rate mechanism, but made matters worse as unemployment soared. Later, when the Bank of England was made independent, only then did the economy start to recover. During this time, Britain's social classes held more of a majority in the major class, with an increase in junior managers and a decline in the working classes.
France shifted from right politics to the left under Mitterrand, whose economic reformations failed after a period of 3 years. After he fell out of power, the economy continued to decline, allowing socialists to fall. Concern over the European debt crisis led a shift back to the left and elect Hollande, who vowed to address the economic crisis.
Socially, France faced an internal conflict as resentment against the foreign-born dramatically increased. Although French voters advocated for restrictions on new immigration, the 2005 revolt in Paris made the government promise to adopt reforms. However, tensions still remained.
In the 1980s was an era of transition and change as Euro-communism briefly took hold of the government. Government corruption was evident, as seen in the 1993 scandal with political bribes.
In 1996, the government ceded power to the center-left under Berlusconi, and in the 2013 elections, leadership went under Enrico Letta. Under Mario Monti, new legislation including raising the retirement age, increasing property taxes, and simplifying the tax code remained.
Although the states had their own circumstances that determined how they would function coming out of the Cold War, their involvement in the European Union was crucial in showing how the countries stood politically and economically.
In 1993, the EU was created by the Maastricht Treaty and was designed to augment European political and economic integration. Its origins stem back to the end of the Second World War with the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community, which eventually turned into the European Economic Community before becoming the European Union. Because of the apparent danger of political isolation within Western Europe, many states and countries joined the EU. France and Italy were part of the 6 countries that founded the start of the ECSC in 1957, while Britain joined the EEC in 1973, and is however due to leave the EU on the April of 2019, an incident known as the Brexit. The EU proved to be useful with creating levels of international security and in the creation of an open market that allowed for the transportation of goods, open travel, and the protection for member states. However, its attempt at creating a monetary union brought about further financial problems to the states, especially for Italy. Although the threat of communism were no more, terrorism came to be the West's new number one enemy. In Britain, the effects of propaganda proved to be dangerous as they were used against them by the Russians. Internally, anti-terror was pushed. Large armed caches were used by the Russians in various areas, placed for planned terrorist attacks. For the French, the terrorist threats came from left-wing politicians and Middle Eastern terrorist groups. Incidents in the 1990s proved that terrorist organizations could achieve a certain level of sophistication. Italy also faced problems with terrorism along with the other 2 countries. However, the various types of terrorism always fail to reach their objective.
New social developments led a way for women as new opportunities emerged.
Women began to constitute a larger part of the workforce, a trend especially prevalent in Britain as the percentage went up around 10% across Western Europe. Women and feminists in Western Europe reached out to the other side of the world through international conferences in hopes and conversations of changing the condition of their lives. Although social aims differed from women's rights to an end of disease, violence, and hunger, their conferences proved to be an indication of how women were being organized to make society realize their problem.
As economies were beginning to recover and birth rates declined, the workforce became reliant on foreign workers. States in Western Europe especially had prevalent amounts of foreign residents, France being the second largest following Germany with 6.4 million, Britain following right after with 5.8 million, and Italy present with 2.5 million. In the majority of the Western European countries, the foreign-born population accounted between 7 to 15% of the population. The arrival of so many foreigners strained the social services of the European nations and created social discontent with the natives, especially within France. The French National Front was created under the leadership of Jean-Marie Le Pen and proved to be very influential.
globalization was brought about by an increase in technology and free trade. Transportation allows for more trade and the faster shipment of goods from place to place. Although globalization benefits society as a whole, it harms some groups such as poor and developing countries. Trade groups such as the Warsaw Pact and NATO helped to protect the trade groups that were made. Globalization in Western Europe was mainly dominated by the formation of the EU. The EU adoption created a large open market that multiple countries within Europe that were able to use. It also protected against the typical inequalities that you'd find in regular trading systems, because the richer EU countries were able to help out the poorer ones. The EU created an open market that allows good transportation of goods, open travel, and protection for member states.